What is up, guys? It's Thompson or Randomania11, bringing you the very first Pokemon X and Y Wi-Fi battle. Now, this battle that I have for you guys today is a singles tournament style battle that I had against someone by the name of Necro up in Brisbane a couple of days ago. The thing about the tournament battle was it had a couple of different clauses on it as opposed to normal Smogon OU battles. The main one being an item clause, meaning that we couldn't have doubled items, which you'll see in this battle does have a slight effect with one of my opponent's Pokemon. But otherwise, getting straight into looking at the teams, I decided to bring a Volt Turn Regenerator team, using the U-Turn and Volt Switch to gain momentum. So I've just got a standard Mega Manectric, an Assault Vest Tornadus T, as well as specially defensive Amoonguss and defensive Slowbro as a bit of a regenerator core, as well as defensive Resto Chesto Rogan Wash to try and wall some of that flying spam that you see with Mega Scizor and Talonflame around, as well as a nice and powerful Choice Banded Scizor. Now looking at my opponent's team, he's going to be bringing a Clefable, a Sableye, a Talonflame, a Gyarados, which is going to end up being Mega Gyarados, as well as a Gliscor and Jolteon. And just looking at that team, I need to really be careful of that Mega Gyarados, because if it does get up 2 Dragon Dances, then it can easily outspeed my entire team, and potentially defeat me easily. So, with that done, let's get into the battle. Now, starting off, my opponent decides to lead with the Jolteon, while I decide to lead with my Mega Manectric. Now, knowing that we both have abilities that render Electric-type moves useless, we both go for our coverage moves, with my opponent going for a Shadow Ball, while I go for the Overheat. Now, my opponent does manage to get the Special Defense drop on the first turn, and now my Manectric is going to be at -2 Special Attack, so I definitely need to switch out on my next turn. And so I decide to go into my Amoonguss, my special defensive wall, to hopefully take the Shadow Ball. Now my opponent gets the second turn special defense drop as well, meaning that on the next turn my opponent's Volt Switch, even though it is resisted, is going to be able to bring my Amoonguss down to just above half health. Now my opponent goes into Sableye on the Volt Switch, while my Amoonguss just goes straight for the Giga Drain, hoping to get a bit of HP back. Now on the next turn, knowing that Sableye is likely going to be going for either Taunt or Will-O-Wisp, I just decide to stay in, because even if my Amoonguss does get taunted, it's not really going to be that big of a deal outside of Spore, while I'm just going to stay in and go for the Giga Drain, hoping to get a bit of HP back. Now this is the part of the battle that might not normally be seen in a Wi-Fi battle, with my opponent Sableye having the Citrus Berry. But, like I said, with the item clause, we couldn't run a full team of leftovers or anything. But, yeah, so my opponent does get a bit of HP back with the Citrus Berry, while my Amoonguss recovers HP with the Black Sludge. On the next turn, my opponent goes for the Will-O-Wisp, hoping to get a bit of residual damage on my Amoonguss, but because it is a special attacker and I'm just going for Giga Drain, it's not really going to cause all that much trouble for me. Now, the next turn my opponent goes for that Prankster Recover, getting quite a bit of HP back, while I'm just going to continue to go for the Giga Drain, because the damage that the burn's doing is easily offset by the Giga Drain plus Black Sludge HP recovery. Now at the end of that turn my taunt wears off, so I decide to go into my Rogan Wash for a free switch, while my opponent just goes for the taunt again on what would have been my Amoonguss. On the next turn my opponent goes for the Will-O-Wisp, once again getting some residual damage off on my walls, but it isn't that big of an issue because I can just go for the Volt Switch, doing some really good damage against that Sableye, and now I'm in a position where I can easily bring in my Scizor, which will outspeed the Prankster with the Bullet Punch and put him in a position where he needs to switch out or else risk getting knocked out. So my opponent decides to go out to his Gyarados to get the Intimidate off and to take the resisted Bullet Punch. Now that my Scizor's at the -1 attack from Intimidate, and is locked into the Bullet Punch, I definitely need to switch out on this turn. So I go out into my Tornadus T as my opponent decides not to Mega Evolve, which made me think that it wasn't Mega Gyarados for a moment, and going straight for the Dragon Dance. Now, on the next turn, my opponent does decide to Mega Evolve, which kind of messed up my play here because I decided to just go straight for the knockoff with my Tornadus T, while my opponent reveals the Ice Fang, which almost knocks out my Tornadus T, but the knockoff is doing barely anything to that Mega Gyarados because it doesn't have the power up from knocking off the item. And so on the next turn, my opponent's free to easily outspeed me and knock me out with the Waterfall. So with my Tornadus T down, I now decide to go out into my Slowbro, knowing that it is my dedicated defensive wall to take whatever the Gyarados wants to go for. So the Gyarados decides to go for the Earthquake, trying to get as much damage off on my Slowbro as possible, while I just go for the Thunder Wave, hoping to at least try to limit what this Gyarados can do against my team. And that Earthquake does less than 50%, so Slowbro is easily able to eat it up, and knowing that he won't be able to knock me out, my opponent decides to switch out into his Clefable on the next turn. So when he switches out, I just decide to go for the Scald, hoping to get any damage off on whatever that I can, knowing that the Psyshock would do nothing against Gyarados if he did decide to stay in. So on the next turn, Clefable just decides to go for a Calm Mind, while I just go for the Thunder Wave, hoping to at least cripple this Clefable any way that I can. So with that Clefable now at +1, I know that I need to get out of there as fast as I can. So I go into my dedicated specially defensive wall, once again my Amoonguss, to take the resisted Moonblast, although it is a critical hit and at +1, really doesn't do all that much damage to my Amoonguss. So on the next turn, I was going to go for the Clear Smog, but I accidentally misclicked and went for the Hidden Power Fire, but it doesn't really matter since it wouldn't have done anything because my opponent does decide to switch out to what would be the perfect counter to my Amoonguss, his Talonflame. So knowing that Amoonguss really isn't in a position to take on the Talonflame, I decide to switch out into my Slowbro to take the Brave Bird, which I'm assuming this would be Choice Banded Talonflame, which does almost half to my Slowbro, which is seriously a lot of damage considering how defensive this Slowbro is. So wanting to once again cripple whatever I can, I decide to go for the Thunder Wave, hoping to get that Talonflame, but unfortunately my opponent does decide to switch out into their Sableye, which will mean that I won't be able to cripple that threat at this moment in time. On the next turn, seeing as they're at a low amount of health, my opponent decides to go for the Recover, while I just go for the Scald, hoping to get off whatever damage I can against it. Seeing that it did less than half, and that if they go for another Recover, then my Slowbro will eventually lose the store, I decide to switch out and go into my Manectric on my opponent's Taunt. Now obviously predicting that I would go for an electric type attack, my opponent goes out into their Jolteon, probably hoping to get some Volt Absorb, restore a bit of HP, but predicting that, I actually go for the Overheat, once again my strongest attack against the Jolteon, allowing me to knock it out, and that means that takes a massive threat away from my opponent's team. My opponent then decides to go out to the Clefable, obviously trying to take any chance that it can to try and set up a Calm Mind with my -2 special attack, while I just decide to go for the Volt Switch, getting out of there as soon as I can, and I go into my Scizor, knowing that a Bullet Punch should be able to knock out that Clefable, even if he does decide to go for the Soft Boiled or the Moonlight, whatever recovery he has. So on the next turn, predicting that he would switch out, I actually go for the U-turn, which unfortunately isn't enough to knock it out due to it being not very effective, and instead the Clefable is then able to restore its HP using Moonlight. Seeing how much damage the U-turn did, I know that I definitely need to bring back in the Scizor, so I go into Rotom, get a bit of Volt Switch damage off on my opponent, and I'm able to freely switch back into my Scizor, and my opponent is fully paralyzed, which I'm assuming they would have gone for Moonblast, which wouldn't have done all that much damage against my Scizor because it does resist it. So not over-predicting once again on this turn, I just go straight for the Bullet Punch, easily able to knock that Clefable out, while my opponent then brings in Gliscor once I've knocked that Clefable out. Seeing as Gliscor can easily wall my Scizor, I decide to go out into my Slowbro, hoping to get some damage off on it with the Scald. My opponent goes then for the Earthquake, obviously just trying to do as much damage to my Slowbro as it can, while my Scald is able to break its substitute. On the next turn, my opponent decides to go for the Toxic on my Slowbro, while I just go for another Scald, almost able to knock that, but unfortunately it just lives. And now my Slowbro is in a position where, with that toxic damage, it will eventually be worn down, which means that my opponent is able to just Toxic Stall me out for the next couple of turns, using Protect and Substitute, just to bring me down to a point of where I need to switch out. So on the next turn, predicting that my opponent is going to think that I'm going to switch, I'm going to go straight out to my Manectric, predicting that he's going to go for the Toxic or the Protect, meaning that I get a free switch into my Manectric. Now he's going to use Protect on the next turn as I go for the Hidden Power Ice, which means that he's now going to be at enough HP where when he brings it in he'll be able to easily wall something else. Now, seeing as he's not going to want to take a Hidden Power Ice, I predict that he's going to switch out into something, so I just go straight for the Volt Switch, able to do some seriously good damage against his Gyarados, meaning that I can now easily switch in my Scizor, outspeed it because the opponent is paralyzed, and just knock out the Mega Gyarados with a super effective Choice Band of U-turn. Having switched out, I now decide to bring in my Manectric, which is going to mean that I'm going to take a turn of toxic damage. My opponent, seeing that my Manectric is at such a low amount of HP with the Toxic, is going to bring in his Gliscor and going to go straight for the Protect as I go for a Hidden Power Ice, meaning that my Manectric only has one turn left. Seeing how low it is, my opponent decides to bring in his Sableye, hoping to take the hit and maybe recover up the next turn once my Manectric's knocked out. But just because I'm going for the Hidden Power Ice does mean that I can easily knock that Sableye out before going down to toxic damage myself. Now with only his Talonflame and his Gliscor left, I can easily bring in my Defensive Wall Slowbro on whatever my opponent decides to bring in, which is going to be his Talonflame, which means that I can get off a massive amount of damage and knock out my opponent's Talonflame with the Scald. Now all that my opponent has left is his Gliscor, which is still going to be a pain to take out because of its toxic stalling shenanigans. So I'm going to decide to bring in my Rotom because we've seen that the Gliscor has Toxic, Protect, Sub, and Earthquake, which means that my Rotom should be able to pretty easily wall this thing. So my opponent goes straight for the Substitute as I switch out into my Rotom, and on the next turns I go for the Hydro Pump, hoping to break the Substitute. He goes for the Protect, obviously just trying to stall out my attacks. Now, not being able to do anything else at the moment because my Rotom is burnt, and he's already used Protect and got a sub up, my opponent goes for the Earthquake, obviously just trying to stall the turns, while my Rotom does unfortunately miss the Hydro Pump. So, on the next turn, I do reveal the rest to my opponent, which at this point my opponent realizes that because of rest I'm easily going to be able to outstall this Gliscor even if the rest of my Hydro Pumps do miss, which I do end up missing a lot of them, and I'm going to be easily able to PP stall out my opponent. So with that, the battle just goes on for a couple more turns up until the point that he realizes that he's not going to be able to get past this Rotom because of rest, in which case he just forfeits. So it was a really good battle, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to bring many more of these to you guys in the future. If you did enjoy it, slap that like button, and I'll see you guys all later. Thanks.